Hello, Internet, and welcome to a very special episode of Brainstorm. We have some guests this week, Ben and Mary from the DIYsect project. Hello, Ben and Mary.
Hello.
Hi.
So, for our audience who may not be familiar, why don't you give us a bit of a rundown of your Kickstarter project?
Okay, well, our project is called DIYsect, and it's a documentary web series on DIY biology and bioarts. So we just launched a Kickstarter to raise $8,000 to travel across the U.S. and to just film and interview all the people that we have on our itinerary list.
We are going across the country to interview people that are practicing biology outside of a corporate and academic setting. So we're looking at people that are either working or are working with community labs, basically spaces where biology is made accessible to anybody who is interested and just anybody generally that's working outside of a corporate or academic setting.
That sounds awesome. Now, we have talked about biohacking on the podcast a little bit before, so our audience is somewhat familiar with that world. What sort of interviews who do you have lined up?
For example, we're interviewing bugs, which is a space that just came out about a year ago in Baltimore, and they're relatively new, but we went and checked it out, and they have an amazing lab space. They also offer courses and a monthly membership to use their lab space. Since we started the project in March, there's actually been 3 new ones that community labs just popped up this summer. It's really a thriving and growing network of DIY biologists. That's just an example of the biohackers we're interviewing.
Another very important aspect of our project is bioartists. So we're looking at Eduardo Cac, who's very famous for having created Alba, which is a transgenic bunny that has some fluorescent proteins in it. So when Alba was born, if you put it over a fluorescent light, it would glow green in the dark. We're also looking at a ton of other artists. Steve Kurtz was very infamous, I would say is the right word, because basically he was creating art from E. coli, and the FBI thought that he was actually a terrorist, and they condemned his house and arrested him, and it turned out to be all completely harmless.
Now, when you say he made art from E. coli, was he just growing it in patterns, or was it, again, sort of a GFP, green fluorescent protein type deal? Like, what do you mean he made art from the E. coli?
I'm not entirely sure, but Steve Kurtz is part of an art collective called Critical Arts Ensemble, and their works are performative, and they only exist on time that they're being performed. And so I'm not quite sure what the E. coli petri dishes were for, but I'm pretty sure it was for a project for the Critical Arts Ensemble.
Oh, I see, I see. Well, that's cool. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about both of your backgrounds?
Both of us, we just graduated from Carnegie Mellon this past May, and my background is actually in biology and art. I received a combined degree.
I do not have any biology background. I'm a filmmaker by trade. I've done some documentary work, and that's mostly where I come from.
Now, obviously, Mary, you're into biology, but I find that even with people into science, they don't necessarily know about this entire subculture, so how did both of you find out about it?
You're very right, because I was just talking to someone that's going into biotechnology, and she had no idea what DIY biology was. Basically, it became sort of a search for me to seek out other artists that were working with biology and just to see how they were finding their resources. And so I came across GenSpace because it was co-founded by an artist named Narit. As an artist that has experience working with plants and plant biology, I always found it difficult to find the resources I needed. And so I uncovered DIY biology, and it's kind of like tumbling down a rabbit hole. I just kept finding more and more things, and that's when I approached Ben.
Like, I didn't know anything about DIY biology, and Mary told me about it. I just thought it was so fascinating, kind of this idea of, biotechnology is obviously very influential you're talking about these people that are democratizing it, and I just thought that was really, really interesting, and I wanted to learn more about it. And I started doing research with Mary, and I just found it to be so fascinating, and I thought it was so interesting how there's so much variety. You had people, people in Brooklyn, and people all the way on the other side of the country, and everybody was asking different questions, and they're all working together, and yeah, I just found it to be super interesting.
You mentioned DIY bio and bio art, and obviously, Mary, that's how you found out about this entire thing. From my perspective, from what I've seen, those seem like very distinct, sort of recreating a more practical biotech in a non-corporate setting. And then there's the bio art, but have you found that there's a lot of crossover, or are they still quite distinct at this point?
Yeah, that's a very good question. For a while, we were kind of struggling to find the connection between DIY biology and bioart, but at the same time, it just felt very intuitive that there was a strong connection between the two. And so when we frame it in terms of public literacy, that's when it all kind of clicked, because what both groups are trying to do, or they're trying to make biology more accessible to the public, and they're both raising awareness on these technologies. And so a lot of the projects that we see in the bioart realm, they're sort of posing these critical questions about these sciences, and they're inviting the public to join in on the discussion in ways that books can't do, or that just science or publications can't do.
At the same time, there is an actual practical crossover. Like, you actually do see the crossover. For instance, GenSpace, they have a lot of artists residencies. For instance, one of their founders, Nurit Barshai, she is an artist by trade, and she was just trying to look for a space where she could practice her artwork. And it just so happened that a community hacker space was exactly perfect for her art. And, she just hosted a show not too long ago, but, her involvement with GenSpace is critical for its development. And I think art has always been, and maybe not always, but especially someplace like GenSpace, they've always worked hand in hand. It's kind of DIY space and art space, and I think it's very typical.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I see. In your sort of research, and obviously once the project is underway, you'll be traveling around, but just in your research, what has been the most surprising, or in a way technically impressive, thing you have found in the DIY bio community? Because that GFP rabbit must not have been easy. So I'm saying, what's sort of been your favorite little project that you found out about?
I think it has got to be the Glowing Plant project, because not only has it stirred up so much controversies, but it's kind of putting the public at a cross section, because they launched this very successful Kickstarter. They raised almost $500,000, and so there's so many people that are behind this project, that are so excited for this project and can't wait for it to happen. But at the same time, it's very scary thinking about releasing these transgenic organisms out into the wild, into the environment. And so you also have a lot of groups that are alarmed and very, very uneasy about it. But the fact that they did a Kickstarter, it sort of popularized this idea that we can build our own organisms and we can make them do what we want them to do.
I'm going to do an awful job explaining it, so I'm going to ask Mary for her help. But the outdoor PCR machine, am I explaining that correctly?
The Deep Woods PCR.
Yeah, the Deep Woods PCR machine. Could you explain it?
We're interviewing an artist named Paul Banus, and he's actually a professor right now at SUNY.
Right.
Yeah. But he's working on a project right now called Deep Woods PCR, where I'm not sure if it's performative or if it's just an ongoing project, but he's basically developing a PCR method for a kind of out in the woods setting. So I like that project because it's at the cross section of DIY and bioart.
I think, to me, that's kind of the perfect example of the cross section we're looking at, where it's like these people like, well, what do we do? We want to take it out of this corporate setting, and then you have an artist who's like, okay, well, let's take it to the extreme. Let's take it as far away from the corporate setting as we possibly can. Let's take it to the woods, and I think that's like so wild and just interesting and innovative to me. And I think that's like, yeah, that's where you really start to see I don't know. Yeah, that's where you really start to see true experimentation.
That is really cool. And you mentioned the glowing plant project, and we did actually interview those guys also, and they're cool guys. But you bring up the controversy. So in your research, have you found, obviously there is public wariness of this kind of technology. Have you found much wariness of biotech people to DIY bio, or from more traditional artists to bio art?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of controversy, but I mean, ultimately, we have tended to find that it seems to be kind of created within the media, so it's like kind of created to create stories and stuff. But ultimately, I think people are pretty interested and excited. I don't know. That's what I've kind of seen.
Most people, when we tell them what our project's about, they're very excited. They're very curious to learn more, and a lot of it's because it's like their first time being exposed to these people. They have no idea that this is happening, and so there's like excitement, and then we also get once in a while it's like, I'm not sure about this. Like, I don't know how I should react to this, but that's okay. Those are the type of reactions that we're expecting, and that should happen. And then when they watch our web series or learn more about the subject, then they can be more self-educated.
Well, that's definitely important. That's one of the reasons I am a huge fan of your project, and I cannot wait for it to get going. So, obviously, to promote the series, why don't you briefly talk about some of the Kickstarter perks you have?
We're actually, should I say, we're working on a new perk right now.
Yeah, we're actually trying to add more prizes to our collection, just because it's coming down to the wire, and it's not going to hurt, having more options for people to choose. But we're going to add some more early access prizes. Yeah.
From now, it'll be $25, and you'll have early access to all the episodes. And we also have been working with, collaborating with an artist in Pittsburgh, and he's been kind of creating these interpretations of DIY biology, fighting
big bio corporations,
and they've been, there's some really exciting prints, and you can check them out on the website. On the Kickstarter. We also have...
But our most popular prize right now is the $25 prize, which is a postcard from wherever we are in the country.
Well, that's cool.
And we also had $100 you can ask a question to a bio artist or something like that that we're going to be interviewing.
Now, are those questions going to be answered and then sent personally to the asker, or do you plan to incorporate some of them directly into the filming?
I mean, that's not out of the question. That's like something we're like, if we think that the answer is something that really fits, then absolutely. But we'll also be sending it personally to the donor. So it's like, we definitely, like, collaboration is definitely an important part of the project.
Awesome. Well, I am out of questions, and Jack has been awfully quiet. Jack, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. All right, kids. I got one question that is a big question. When I first heard about the bunny and first of all, okay, two questions. First question, do you know if that guy kept a bunny as like a pet?
He actually did not. This is what's really interesting about the project, is all the pictures that have been seen, they're all like fake, not fake, but they're like, this is what would happen if. So we don't know for sure if he's actually ever been in contact with the bunny. Am I correct about that?
Well, I mean, he definitely posed in pictures with it, but that project, it's interesting because it's kind of known for its shock value, and a lot of people think that that's what the whole project is, really. It all comes down to its own shock value.
Right. But the bunny has been in a laboratory for its entire life, I think.
Oh, poor bunny. I actually had a friend who had a pet bunny. While her mother was vacuuming, she accidentally stepped on the bunny's back, broke its back. So I was just thinking a glowing bunny would stop that from ever happening again.
It's an interesting thought.
Yeah, my second question. I actually heard of the glowing bunny, and I heard people talking about the glowing bunny a little bit, and one of the things that came up was just this very cynical comment about how this technology will just get used to make designer pets for Paris Hilton and fucking rich people, right? Mm-hmm. Now, that sentiment, I think, just comes from a deep-seated, almost a stigma and a mistrust of anything to do with creating transgenic organisms, creating new species, even, if you were to go that far. Any comments on that, or is the documentary itself your comment?
I'd like to respond to that. First of all, I think that your sentiment is a very interesting one. The glowfish, which I'm sure you've heard of and seen, mm-hmm. They are actually... I believe this is still true, that they are not legal in California, because they finally came to, they're like, well, you're using this very powerful technology for like a completely useless reason, you know?
For like decorative.
Yeah, just for a decorative purpose, and we just think it's, you know, kind of immoral. But ultimately, there are uses of the technology that have been very, very powerful and very beneficial. For instance, one of the things, I don't know if you've ever heard of geopigs, but basically when the pigs excrete, they produce less phosphorus, which phosphorus is harmful to the environment. So basically on pig farms,
EnviroPigs.
Yes, EnviroPigs. Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about that on Brainstorm a while back.
And then I think the coolest is the biosteel goats, which are producing
the ones that eat steel.
Or no. Not quite. They produce, or biosteel goats. Sorry, they produce.
So they're called biosteel. Yeah, they're called biosteel goats.
They're called biosteel.
They have proteins in their milk.
Yeah, make a spider silk.
Spider silk. Yeah, spider and that silk. Has all, I mean, that's like, what is it? It's more powerful than steel. So.
We talked to an artist named Jalila, who is in the Netherlands, I believe, and she created a project called Bulletproof Skin. And so she actually, she grew this tissue culture skin with the spider silk and shot a bullet, and it stopped the bullet. Like, it's that strong.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, okay, question. How do I get some of this?
Well, I mean, I guess you'll have to break into a military compound, because it's...
she got her silk from Randy Lewis, who's in Utah. We're interviewing him.
I think now they're all owned by the military, and it's pretty highly guarded.
Can you ask how much a goat would cost? Because, I mean, I've also heard goat's milk is tasty, so I'm assuming you could just filter out the silk proteins, and then you're left with milk.
Yeah, I maybe, yeah. I don't really know how that would work, but...
I'm going to have the coolest farm ever.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, the stigma, I think, is more than just like these organisms will be used for decorative purposes. I think the biggest stigma is just the fact that you're creating something that's not natural, and you're kind of bypassing this evolutionary process that takes thousands and thousands of years, and people don't like that. It's like people just don't like tinkering with nature.
But they still eat bananas, so...
They do. And tomatoes.
Yeah, tomatoes. And pretty much every vegetable.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
So...
I guess my final question, I don't know if Jack has any more, but obviously you guys are very interested in this thing, but in your research and in your prepping for this project, have your opinions changed at all? Like, was there ever something that you initially, there was a little bit of an ick factor, and then it's like, okay, you got over that? Or has it always been like, okay, this is all awesome immediately?
This is all awesome immediately.
I guess the one thing I thought was interesting was, not my opinion, but my understanding of, like, GMO crops and stuff. I think I had a very simplistic understanding of it initially, Now that I'm, like, talking to people and stuff, and, people are like, well, pretty much everything you wear is GMO, and, it's like, so, I think that has become an interesting development. I'm not saying I'm, like, now completely pro-GMO, but I just think I have a more complex understanding of it,
Yeah, I think the same reaction. Like I kind of grew up hearing all these negative things about GMOs, and then I feel like that fear has gone way down for me now. Like I don't feel like a huge threat from GMOs as like people around me have made it out to be.
Jack, do you have any more questions? Eventually, they just get silly.
I'm trying to think. I'm doing the Jack Sparrow face, in fact, right now. Ooh. My last question is, yay, I get a poster! I know that's not really a question, but it's my show.
It sounds awesome. What are your stretch goals?
Oh, very good question. So we've been researching a lot about Europe, and so we decided if we can make it to 15,000, we will go to Europe and film everybody, like all the DIY hackerspaces, all the bio art centers, just everyone, because they have so many amazing things happening in Europe right now. And so 15,000.
Yep, 15,000 would be our next goal. We really want to make it happen, so.
All right, you heard it here first, audience, and that is really kind of a dichotomy, because the European public is really anti-biotech and GMO, but they have some of the best sort of people in that realm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic actually, because there's actually a lot more restrictions in Europe. Like transgenics are just out of the question. You can't do that at a DIY biolab.
Yeah, there's just certain things that are impossible. And even with BioArt, there are certain things that are just really, really difficult to showcase, which is what one of the BioArtists is.
Yeah, you have to get a license and go through all this legal maneuvering. It's just very difficult. I mean, it's not impossible, but it's just very, very difficult. And we were just Skyping with Marcus Smith, who he's kind of in synthetic biology and also in ethics, and he also curated a BioArt exhibition, and he also created BioFaction, which is a film festival for science films. So he's in all these different areas, but he was telling us that we asked him what he thought about there being more restrictions in Europe, but yet there's more kind of BioArt centers. There's a lot more crossovers between art, science, and technology. And we asked him what he thought about that, and why in the U.S. we're kind of dry in terms of the bioart intersections. He said something interesting that was like something around the lines of the U.S. kind of cares more about making money than Europeans do, and so they're less inclined to go into the arts. So I thought that was very interesting.
Also, here in the States, I noticed there's certain rigid ideas about what is expected of certain roles in society. And I think, the whole idea of, freedom and prosperity and freedom of expression and everything has caused the culture to sort of self-regulate, because there are certain things that authority is not saying to do, yet there's a whole bunch of stuff that society is saying to not do.
Right. I don't know. I've also noticed that I think that in Europe that people are much more open to the idea of art. I don't know, being like you can discuss anything within art. I think there are certain stigmas or certain taboos within American cultures, especially biotechnology is something that we're kind of afraid to talk about.
Yeah, I remember when I first heard about bioart, I was just kind of like, how is this art? I didn't understand, because it always been fed to me that you have the artistic types and then the logic and science types. The logic and science types have horrible fashion sense, while the artistic types are like wearing paintbrushes in their hair.
Well, to be fair, I have horrible fashion sense, so...
Me too.
It kind of goes back to, I almost want to say stereotypes, but rather I think that there are certain, what could be described as subcultures that spring around certain activities. Like, you have the alternative and bohemian and hippie and hipsters and all those subcultures that gravitate toward art, and then you have the more seduced. It's like almost like scientifically minded people all have their own subculture and have their own ideas of what to do and how to be, essentially. it could be that there's just that division. However, with the internet, those worlds are starting to bleed together. All the worlds are starting to bleed together.
Right.
And I think it's also important to think about that, like, in a weird way, kind of like DIY bio and BioWare kind of are being like squished together in this corner, and so they end up kind of communicating with each other because of that. Like you look somewhere like Gen Space. I mean, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but what's happening here is like you talk about this idea of subculture. They're kind of being squished within the same subculture, and as a result, they're kind of having this conversation together.
It's about time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the European thing also, this is just an idea I had, but it may be almost a sense of rebelling, like, okay, we can't do this, but how far could we push it? Because, as soon as you tell someone not to do something, that's what they want to do.
They're gonna push back.
Immediately.
Especially artists, right?
Yeah, those dang artists. I hope you guys make it to Europe, and we'll obviously be linking to the project in the description. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
You're going to be buying 50 posters each, right?
Yeah, totally.
All right. Great. All right. Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, and maybe at the end of this project, or if you do another one, we'll get you back on the show.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Love that.
Awesome. Okay, and I think we'll cut it there.
Alrighty. Ding.
Great.